see, this is they're doing a section on the flying palaces in Indian mythology, and it's actually a good example of where they are um, as bad as what they're claiming to debunk. So this is their argument. There were legitimately stories in Indian mythology about flying palaces. That's not disputed. Everybody accepts and acknowledges that. Um, so they mentioned that, and then instead of talking about how there's a story and how maybe it's similar to the stories in Ezekiel about the flying thrones, um, what they do is they jump to a forgery that explains the physics of how it works, and then they say it can't possibly be true because the physics of how it works comes from a forgery. But the issue at hand is not how this would have worked or how this thing would have flown. It's the fact that it was seen and that there's a parallel across cultures of seeing flying palaces and flying kings and flying devices. How it works or is not like it's of no importance. So I mean, this it's they're really not addressing any of the possible. I mean, unless you think that we have the technology that an advanced civilization would require to come across. I mean, we obviously don't. We're still trying to figure out how to get to the planet that's closest to us. So like to think that we can debunk that is ridiculous. Um, and to suggest that it's impossible because the forgery. I mean, this is as ridiculous as what they're trying to debunk is. Um, I just want to rewind just a little bit though to the last part. Because the precise thing, I mean, they actually said it at the end of the Ezekiel section. They said this idea is debunked because similar ideas are in other places in the Bible and in other comparative myths. No, that doesn't debunk it. In fact, that reinforces it. That's the whole point, is that it exists in other cultures. And that's what needs to be explained, is why does this exist in all of these different cultures. Even if you can bring it back to a single source, you're still not explaining the question as to why. You're not. You're not even like again. You're not wrong. You're not addressing the question. So it's. But again, I mean, I think that a part of the disconnect is that the individual that made this film is responding to the parts that convinced him. And let's be clear, if you watch a video and you're convinced of ancient aliens by the arguments that they're providing, I won't get into too much detail, but they're not good arguments. And if you find those arguments convincing, then you're probably not the brightest person to begin with. So your debunking is maybe going to miss a few points, right? Because you're operating on this sort of it's the difference between the engineer and the mathematician, right? The mathematician wants ideas, theories, abstractions, how to, take ideas and universalize them so that they can be applied to specific things, broader concepts. And the engineer is unable to see the forest for the trees. Everything is a specific detail, and all this sorts of stuff. So if this guy is convinced of this idea by the presentation of concrete, physical processes, then for him, the way to debunk it is to show that those specific examples aren't accurate. I mean, the argument was not good in the first place, so the debunking is not really getting anywhere except throwing away arguments that were never very good. And so in the whole process, the actual question never really truly gets addressed. This is particularly frustrating because he puts down the thing that's of interest. It's the same thing with the Ezekiel. He tells you what's interesting, and then instead of exploring it, he completely tosses it aside and gets lost in a diversion instead. The diversion that the film, or sorry, that the TV series seemed to want to create. Um, so, I mean, again, it's certainly curious that there's all of this discussion in an Indian mythology about these flying palaces where the elite lived, and you know, even if it wasn't a hoax, discussions about whether we would have the technology to understand that, it's not meaningful. It's not relevant at all, and it's just not getting anywhere. So I'm almost done eating. Actually, I'm less done eating than I thought I was. I still got about half that left. We'll see how far I get into this stuff.